Last year, a Girl Scout troop in Seattle built a fully insulated tiny house, furnished it with a bed, a dresser, and artwork, and donated it to someone who had been sleeping on the streets for over a year. The materials cost about $2,500. Meanwhile, cities like Los Angeles were spending upwards of $500,000 per unit on permanent supportive housing that would not be ready for another 4 years. So how are volunteers and small nonprofits building functional micro-shelters for less than the price of a used car, while billion-dollar programs keep falling behind? To understand why these micro-shelters are spreading across America, you first need to see what they're replacing. Because the traditional system isn't just slow, it's actively pushing people away. On a single night in January 2025, HUD sent volunteers into every major city in the country to count the number of people sleeping on streets, under bridges, and in emergency shelters. The final number was 745,652. More than 266,000 of them were completely unsheltered, sleeping outside with nothing between them and the weather. And those numbers have climbed 27% since 2013. That's not a blip. That's over a decade of a crisis getting worse, while the traditional approach burned through billions of dollars with almost nothing to show for it. A single unit of permanent supportive housing in cities like Los Angeles or San Francisco can cost upwards of $500,000 to build. And it can take years of permitting, construction, environmental review, and red tape before one person moves in. Years. While someone sleeps on the concrete a block away from the construction site, walk into a congregate shelter in any major American city, and you'll find rows of cots packed together in a gymnasium or warehouse. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of people sleeping inches apart from strangers with no privacy, no personal space, and no way to keep your belongings safe. For women, for trauma survivors, for people with mental health conditions, that environment can feel more dangerous than the sidewalk. And a lot of people make exactly that calculation every night. That's assuming beds are even available. Most shelters fill up fast, enforce strict curfew rules, and won't allow pets. So if you're a veteran sleeping in a tent with your dog, the one companion who kept you going through the worst period of your life, the system is basically telling you to choose between a roof and your best friend. A lot of people choose the tent. And honestly, can you blame them? But that gap between what people actually need and what cities have been offering is exactly where the micro-shelter movement found its opening. And the people filling that gap aren't government agencies or billion-dollar developers. They're volunteers with lumber and a Saturday afternoon. In Seattle, the Low-Income Housing Institute has been building tiny house villages since 2015 as a direct response to this crisis. They cracked a formula that city planners had been overcomplicating for years. Take $2,500 in construction materials, a pile of lumber, some plywood, a few sheets of insulation. Get a group of volunteers together on a Saturday morning, and by that afternoon, somebody who has not slept indoors in months has a weatherproof, insulated, lockable tiny house with their name on it. You skip the 18-month permit process, the environmental impact reviews, and the design committees. Just people with hammers building a house for someone who needs one. These houses are roughly 8 by 12 feet. They are insulated, they keep the rain out, and they lock from the inside. Some of them have porches and flower boxes. The labor is donated. A lot of the materials come through partnerships with local building trade organizations. And over 325 of these tiny houses have been built by volunteers, students, churches, and local businesses across Seattle. One was built by a Girl Scout troop and came furnished with a bed, a dresser, artwork, and boxes of cookies. At a single build event at Seattle's CenturyLink Event Center, over 400 volunteers from the tech company Vulcan, along with contractors and pre-apprentices, built 30 tiny houses in one day. 30 homes, one day. Try getting a single unit of traditional housing past the zoning board in that time. Seattle now runs 10 tiny house villages spread across the city on government, private, nonprofit, and church-owned properties. Each village serves between 20 and 70 people and can be set up for between $100,000 and $500,000 total, depending on how much infrastructure needs to go in. Compare that to a traditional emergency shelter that takes years to site and permit and costs millions to construct. The math isn't even close, but volunteer builds, as impressive as they are, have a ceiling. When you need to shelter hundreds of people across dozens of cities, you need something that ships on a truck and goes up in under an hour. That's a manufacturing problem, not a volunteer problem. And that's exactly what a company called Pallet figured out. Pallet was founded in 2016 in Everett, Washington, with a simple idea: build small, prefabricated sleeping shelters from aluminum and composite panels that ship flat, arrive on a truck, and assemble on site in about 45 minutes. Each unit is 64 to 120 square feet, roughly the size of a large walk-in closet. They come with insulation, LED lighting, electrical outlets, smoke detectors, and can handle winds up to 110 miles per hour, and snow loads of 25 pounds per square foot. These are not tents with walls. They are engineered shelters designed to last, and the team building them is not working from some Silicon Valley campus. More than half of Pallet's employees have personally experienced homelessness, substance use disorder, or the criminal justice system. They are building the shelters they once needed. That detail alone tells you something about how this movement operates differently from the top-down approach that has been failing for decades. By 2022, Pallet had deployed shelters in roughly 100 communities across California, Washington, Minnesota, Hawaii, and New Jersey. Cities like Denver, Chico, and Georgetown were standing up entire villages of these units in weeks instead of years. And when a city council can drive past a finished village 6 weeks after signing the contract, that changes the political calculus on homelessness pretty fast. Now, Pallet shelters aren't $2,500. Standard units start around $7,500, and the larger models with bathrooms run close to $50,000. But for cities comparing that to the $500,000 price tag of a traditional permanent housing unit, the math barely needs explaining. You can shelter 25 people in Pallet units for the cost of one permanent apartment, and you can do it in 45 days instead of 4 years. That's not an incremental improvement. That's a completely different timeline for saving someone's life. And the outcomes back it up. Reports from some of those communities show that nearly half of residents who entered a Pallet village eventually moved on to secure permanent housing. That's a transition rate most traditional programs would love to claim. But here's the question that nobody building quick shelters had fully answered yet. What happens after someone gets a roof? Because a tiny shelter without support can become just a nicer version of the same dead end. And one place in Texas was about to prove that the answer had nothing to do with construction materials. About 2,000 miles southeast of Seattle, on a stretch of land off Hog-Eye Road that used to be empty farmland, something completely different was taking shape. Community First Village is a 51-acre master-planned neighborhood built specifically for people coming out of chronic homelessness. It was developed by a nonprofit called Mobile Loaves and Fishes, founded by a former real estate developer named Alan Graham. Graham started delivering meals to homeless people from the back of a minivan in 1998. But he did not stop at dropping off food. He started spending nights on the streets himself, eventually logging over 250 nights sleeping outside on sidewalks and under bridges with the people he was trying to help. Not as a stunt, not for a documentary, not for a fundraising brochure. Just to understand what it actually feels like when you have nowhere to go and nobody expecting you home. And what he learned during those nights changed his entire approach. He stopped seeing homelessness as a housing problem and started seeing it as a relationship problem. The people who ended up on the streets for years had not just lost their apartments. They had lost every meaningful connection in their lives. Family gone, friends gone, Every support system that most of us take for granted had collapsed. The isolation was not a side effect of being homeless. It was the engine that kept people stuck there. So Graham did not just build housing. He built a neighborhood designed to replace what people had lost. Community First Village opened in 2015, and today houses more than 470 formerly homeless residents. The tiny homes range from 200 to 400 square feet, and they are clustered around shared community spaces with kitchens, laundry rooms, showers, gardens, parks, an amphitheater, and a chapel. There is an organic farm with over 3 acres of vegetable production, plus dairy goats, chickens, rabbits, donkeys, and honeybees. But the part that separates this place from anything else in the country is the micro-enterprise program. Residents earn a real income working in an on-site art studio, a blacksmith shop, a woodworking forge, and an auto repair shop. There is a tiny home hotel on the property where visitors can stay overnight, and residents work to clean and maintain the rooms. People who had not held a job in years are showing up every morning with something to do and someone counting on them. The retention rate sits at 88%. Let that number land for a second. That means nearly 9 out of 10 people who move in do not end up back on the streets. In a field where success is usually measured in small percentage improvements, 88% retention from a population of chronically homeless people is almost unheard of. Travis County invested about $35 million of federal relief dollars into expansion, and the nonprofit broke ground on an additional 127 acres that will eventually hold 1,400 new homes. When the full build-out is complete, Community First Village will house 1,900 people across 178 acres, making it the largest housing community of its kind in the country. Alan Graham says they are past the shovel-ready phase. No more digging machines, no more water and sewer lines. All they need now is wood, hammers, and money. What Community First Village proves is something the traditional shelter system has been getting wrong for decades. A locking door keeps someone alive, but a neighborhood keeps them human. And you cannot build a neighborhood out of gymnasium cots. So if the model works this well, why is not every city in America building one? Because there is a fight happening on the other side of the story that does not get nearly enough attention. When Mayor Mike Johnston took office in Denver, he declared a homelessness emergency and committed to finding housing for 1,000 people as fast as possible. The city partnered with Pallet to build La Paz Micro Community, a cluster of 60 tiny homes on a block in the Overland neighborhood. The whole thing was finished in 45 days. Every bed was filled with people from the streets within a week. Johnston's approach was deliberately low barrier. No intake screening for drug rehab completion, workforce training, or mental health treatment. Just come inside. Get stable. Get warm. Then the case managers and service providers start working with you on next steps. The idea was that you can't expect someone to fill out intake forms and pass a drug test while they're hypothermic and haven't eaten in 2 days. Stability first, everything else second. Denver's broader initiative, called All in Mile High, has helped shelter and support more than 2,230 people through a combination of tiny homes, leased apartments, and converted hotels. In a city where tent camps were spreading through parks and underpasses, those numbers meant something real. But the original La Paz plan called for 120 tiny homes. That number got cut in half after neighbors pushed back hard. One resident told a local reporter that the neighborhood was only 120 houses big, and adding 120 shelter units would effectively double the population overnight. Others worried about safety, property values, and the lack of grocery stores or public services nearby. Some showed up to community meetings for months, demanding the city put the micro-community somewhere else. This pattern plays out in almost every city that tries. NIMBY resistance, fights over zoning regulations that were never written for this kind of housing, and political standoffs that can drag on longer than the actual construction would take. It is one of the most frustrating contradictions in this entire movement. The shelters can go up in 45 days, but the arguments about where to put them can last 45 months. In California, Governor Newsom announced a plan to deploy 1,200 tiny homes across Los Angeles, San Diego, San Jose, and Sacramento. The state awarded contracts to 6 different manufacturers, including Pallet. But months later, there was still no word on when anyone would actually move in. Land, permits, and politics move slower than prefab panels. And even the people championing this movement will tell you straight up that shelter without services is an incomplete answer. Without wraparound support like mental health care, substance abuse treatment, job training, and case management, a tiny home can stall someone in a slightly better version of the same cycle. A roof is step 1. But without someone helping you get your ID back, access your benefits, find a doctor, and eventually apply for permanent housing, that roof is a ceiling. The programs getting the strongest results, Community First Village, Seattle's LIHI network, the Pallet Villages across Washington state, all pair housing with on-site service providers. Residents get help tracking down Social Security numbers, accessing healthcare, building resumes, reconnecting with family when possible, and eventually transitioning into permanent housing. The case managers are not checking boxes. They are walking alongside people who have not had anyone in their corner for years. That costs money. Operating a village of 20 to 70 people can run between $60,000 and $500,000 per year, depending on how much staffing you put in. But compare that number to the alternative. One study out of Charlotte, North Carolina, found that a single chronically homeless person can cost taxpayers over $40,000 a year in emergency room visits, police interactions, and jail stays alone. A tiny home with a case manager costs a fraction of that and actually produces results. And here is the number that makes it really hard to argue against. Seattle's Human Services Department documented that tiny house villages make up about 12.5% of all shelter beds the city supports, but account for less than 3% of total homelessness spending. More beds, better outcomes, a fraction of the cost. That is not a feel-good talking point. That is a budget argument. Now, one reality that outreach workers and preparedness-minded people deal with every day is that a huge number of unsheltered people will not make it into one of these villages for weeks or even months. They need something they can carry with them right now. That is why a lot of outreach teams have been handing out portable thermal barriers, like the TerraShell Emergency Thermal Bag. It is built on the same reflective insulation principles as these microhomes, but packed down into something you can throw in a backpack or keep in your car. It reflects up to 90% of your body heat back to you without batteries or electricity. If you have ever put together a care package for someone sleeping outside or wanted something reliable in your own trunk for a roadside emergency, it is one of the most effective items per dollar you can carry. There is a link in the description if you want to check it out. But even with the political fights, the funding gaps, and the neighbors who do not want a village on their block, the volunteer pipeline behind this movement keeps growing. And the people showing up are not just college students with free weekends. In Austin, major home builders like David Weekley Homes, Lenner, and Taylor Morrison have donated labor and material to build permanent microhomes at Community First Village, saving the nonprofit $240,000 on a single project. These are companies that build houses that cost $400,000 for a living, and they are sending their crews to build shelters that cost $2,500 each for free. In Seattle, trade apprentices and union workers are using tiny house builds as hands-on training, so new construction workers develop their skills while someone without a roof gets a home. Both sides walk away with something they did not have that morning. That is the kind of system that scales, with over 745,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night, and more than 266,000 of them completely unsheltered. The scale of this problem still dwarfs even the most ambitious building programs, and the 2025 HUD report confirmed that homelessness has climbed 27% over the past decade, even as billions have been poured into traditional housing-first policies. But something is shifting in the way communities respond. Cities that spent decades debating permanent housing projects are now fast-tracking micro-communities because the outcomes are showing up in real time. Volunteers who never thought they could make a dent in this crisis are spending a Saturday afternoon building a tiny house that will keep a family dry and warm for years. And nonprofits are proving that with the right model, you can house someone for less than the cost of a decent used car. If you want to get involved, the entry points are everywhere. Organizations like the Low Income Housing Institute in Seattle and Mobile Loaves and Fishes in Austin accept volunteers for build days year-round. Materials for a basic tiny house run about $2,500. Some groups accept donations as small as a stack of lumber, insulation, or hardware store gift cards. Even putting together a winter care package with thermal blankets, warm socks, and waterproof gear for someone in your community bridges the gap until a shelter spot opens up. The broader lesson of this whole movement is something that sounds almost too simple to be true. When you give someone a small, private, dignified space, they can call their own. With a door that locks and walls that keep the rain out, everything else starts to become possible. Job applications get filled out, appointments get kept, recovery programs get followed through. Not because a tiny home fixes addiction or mental illness, but because nobody can fix anything in their life when they are focused on surviving the night. If you found this useful, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, breaking down the real solutions people are building for the biggest problems in America. And the next video on screen goes even deeper into how communities are rethinking housing from the ground up. Go check it out.